Professor Wergele's here. We just got done looking at the front end. We were in REST-client.html. We're going to take a look at REST-client.javascript. So this is my front end code. You'll see this is what it looks like. So I'm going to have everything dynamic. They can do a get, post, put, or delete. They can type in the domain, and they can pass up data in name value pairs, key value pairs. So let's look at the back end that's going to handle this request. So make sure you upload your code to the server. We're going to look at REST-server.js. So we've already connected to Mongo. We saw that connection. We went over Mongo quickly to understand how the Mongo database works. And here is a server script file. So this is Node. You'll see I'm requiring HTTP. I'm going to be on port 8000. I'm requiring the Mongo client. Now you could use others. You don't have to use MongoDB client. You could use, MongoJS or Mongoose. There's a bunch of ones out there. You'll see the default collection name is dataset, and I'm requiring query string. Now, we're going to be running this on our local machine. Now, remember we went over cores. So if I have this HTML file on my server and I request the Node script on the same server, I won't have a problem. But if I'm on any other server, or if I'm on my local machine requesting to the server, I'm going to get a CORS error. So I'm going to break the same origin policy, and therefore my CORS request will get denied. My cross origin request is going to be denied because it's not from the same domain. Therefore, I need to specify that. So we can do that in the server code. Now, we saw it with PHP in the CORS lecture. Let's take a look at it with Node. So in Node, any response that I'm going to do, I need to make sure in the header, just like with PHP, we did content type to specify the meme type. We also need to do access control. So here's my response. In the response, I can write in the header, I'm going to specify the code that was returned, like status 200, 404, 500, as well as this JavaScript object. The first value is going to be the content type. What am I returning? We're going to be working with MongoDB. So everything that's returned from Mongo, I wouldn't say everything, but most things returned from Mongo are JSON. So I'll do application JSON. Now this is the meme type. And I don't expect you to know all of those, but you'll want to know a few. But you can always go and search. So you can search JSON meme. Okay, and Mozilla has a good article that shows all the different common meme types. So if I do a search for JSON, you'll see it's application/JSON. But then I need to make sure that the CORS request will be allowed. Now, we saw in the CORS lecture that I need to specify the access control, and I need to specify the origins that are allowed. Now, usually you can put something like a star, so I can say allowed from everybody, but in this case, we're going to be requesting it from our local machine. It's not going to be requested from a server. So in some cases, you do have to switch this to null. Right now, I'm going to put it as star, but I'll put a comment here that sometimes the origin needs to be set to null in order to work from the local machine. So when I'm on my local machine, technically there's no origin, there's no server, there's no domain. And actually when I send up a request from my local machine, the origin is null. So if I specify null here, then it will work. Sometimes when I specify star, some browsers don't allow star to be accessed from the local machine. It has to be some actual domain. So in some cases, I do have to put null here. So we may come back here and switch that to null, but let's see what happens when I do a star. So then you'll see I'm going to stringify the message. Now the message is going to be back from Mongo. So like if I try to insert a record, I get my message back, and I'm going to send that. So I'm going to stringify the message and send that to my request. So whoever's making a request, here's my response. And I'm going to send back the result, the code, and the message. Okay, you'll see here I'm communicating with MongoDB. So in our REST server test, we did a Mongo connect, and if there was a connect, we had an error here. So I'm going to go back to the REST client, and here I'm connecting as well. I'm doing Mongo connect. I'm connecting to localhost over port 27017. That's MongoDB's port. And remember, we had to specify something here. We had to specify it was a new parser, and we also had to specify the unified topology. So I'm going to copy this, put it back into the server. That way we don't get any errors. And then here I have my callback. So if I connect this will be called. So whatever function I pass as a parameter. So you'll see here we made our own function. We made our own function and we passed the error and the DB. Here I'm making it more dynamic. So I'm going to pass up the function that's going to be called as a parameter when I call Mongo. Now here I'm going to process the HTTP bodies request. So remember, we looked at how HTTP works. The client will make a request, and the request will have a header and a body. The header will be the address, the query string, and the body will be the message. So if I do a post request, the data, the parameters, the key value pairs are sent in the body. The server gets that request, processes it, and sends back a response. So if I do a post request, I need to grab the data from the body. So here I'm processing the body. So essentially, whenever there's data, I'm going to go and grab the data and add it to the body. And then once this is over, once it's done, I'm going to call this function, the callback. So there's going to be a function call, and I'm going to parse the body with my query string. So it's going to find the question mark, grab the key value pairs, put them into a JavaScript object. And you'll see the ampersand. So grab the next key value pairs, put it into the object. So whenever I'm parsing it, it's going to be an object instead of the query string. And here I'm creating a server. So I'm going to create a server, and this server is going to be looking for different requests. So if I scroll down, you'll see I'm listening on whatever port I specify. So if I scroll all the way up to the top, you'll see I'm listening on port 8000. Now, if you have an app running on 8000, you may need to switch this. So maybe 8001, you can go back down to 3000, depending on what you want to do. You could stop the other app temporarily, start it back up, but two apps cannot be running on the same port. And that's why Apache cannot be running on 80 and Node be running on 80. You have to have one or the other. So I have Apache running on 80, now port 80 is taken. I cannot use it for any other node script. And if I'm using 8000, if I have one node script running on 8000, that port's taken. So I have to start up another port. So after I create the server on that port, I want to print out the request. So I'm going to do a console.dir. The request URL is going to be this. So it's essentially going to be the request.url. Now you'll see this function is going to be called. It's creating a server, and any request that comes up will be in this parameter. Now we can think about a request. So let's go ahead and run this. Let's look at this request, and then we can see how we can parse the request and handle the request. So I'm going to update the server. And this code needs to be ran on the local machine. So what I can do is I can bring the HTML file that we created back down to my local machine. Now, you'll see drag and drop doesn't work like it does the other ways. If I drag this and drop, it's just fine. So I need to search for it here in my FileZilla. So search for your directory, go into your lectures, or in the REST lecture, and then I can just do a double click, or I can do a drag and drop. So I'm going to override the file that's on the local machine, and you'll see it's here. So I can open that up in brackets. Technically, I can run this on the server. I just want to show you that the CORS request works. And you can only test that if it's on a different domain. So here I'm running on my local machine. So now we should be able to see this CORS request work. So now I'm going to do HTTP, and it's going to be www.professorwergeles.com. And then it's going to be on port 8000. And let's send up some data. I need this script to be running. So if I come back to the terminal, and I'm going to run the REST server.js. So now the server is running, and I'm going to make this GET request. So usually you're going to open up the console so we can see what this prints, and you'll see the server is printing here as well. So I can see what the client prints, and here's my server. So essentially I'm running a client server application. I can see both of them. So the client's literally on my local machine, and the server's up on my AWS. So if I click on send, okay, let's see what happened here. So it worked, but when I got to line 48, it crashed. So essentially, here's the request URL. It doesn't send up the domain, but it will send up a question mark, name equal to Nick, which are my key value pairs here. So essentially, I need to grab this data and then put it into the database. Now, they have some frameworks we could use, but I'm going to show you how to do it with our own code. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to split the request on the /. So here's my API URL. I can grab the request. I want to make sure it's the request URL, and I'm going to do a split on the /. Now let's think about this. If I split on the /, then what are we going to have? So I can print that out. Okay, so line 50 is going to crash because we didn't have API URL, but now we do. So let's see if I update the server. Okay, the code will not update automatically. I need to run it again. Server's running. Send up another request. And now you'll see I split on the /, and now the API URL is just going to have the question mark and then the key value pairs. Okay, you'll see now I don't get an error and it says this is a bad request, so I need to do further processing. So I'm doing a GET request here. If I go back to the server code, it's going to go into this first method. So let's write the GET request ourselves. So you see I'm doing a split on the /, and the first element will be the collection name. So I need to send the collection name when I'm making this GET request. So let me do a / data set. Okay, and let's see what happens here. So here's my server, here's my client. I put the data set there. And now you'll see I have the request URL, but also includes the data set this time. But you'll see I need another /. Okay, so if I put another / do a GET, now I have two /. So the first element will be the data set, and the second element will be the actual data itself, because I'm doing a split based off this /. So here's the original request. I'm going to do a split, so the left will be empty, so that's going to be 0. The first element will be data set. The second element will be the actual data that's sent. So if I come back to the code, you can keep that in mind. So that's why the first element is the collection name, and you'll see the method's equal to GET. So I'm going to go right here in this if statement, and we're going to write how to do a GET request with MongoDB. If I scroll up, you'll see I have this Mongo, which is my connection. So I can call Mongo here. So I'm calling Mongo, and you'll see Mongo requires a parameter. It's going to need the callback function. What function do I want to call after I connect to the database? So here, I'm going to create an anonymous function. So here's my function. And just like in our REST server test, you'll see this function that's being called has an error and then the DB that's connected. So I'm going to do this same connection here. It's just going to be dynamically, so I don't have to write the connection each time. So here's the function. Here's my error, and here's going to be my database. I can call it DB or client, and then this function is going to be passed to the Mongo function. Okay, but usually we'll write it on multiple lines. So I'm going to open this up, and we first want to check if there's an error. So if there's an error, what are we going to do? Well, I'm only going to write one line of code, so I don't need my brackets. Essentially, I'm going to respond. Now that respond method is up here at the top. Here's my respond method. So I need the result, code, and message. Or sorry, the response, code, and message. So I'm going to call my respond method. That way I don't have to write this several times. I just have a function that's called dynamically. So here's my result, okay, which is going to be here. The error is going to be 500, which remember is an internal server error. And here's the message. I'm going to have a connection error, and then I can actually pass the error so the user can see what's going on. If there's no error, then I can try to connect. So let's see if we can get this error. I can update the code on the server, come back and run the code again, make sure it's the updated version. Come over here with my GET request, do a send. You'll see I don't get an error. Okay, so I didn't get an error, so I'm able to connect to the database, and then we can continue writing. So if I connect to the database, I need to select which DB I want to use. So I'm going to write a constant, okay, because this is not going to change. You'll see I have the keyword client. So I can say, based off my connection to the client, which is the database, I'm going to set the DB to demo. Okay, I don't have to set it to demo. I can actually dynamically set it. But this is just the database name. You'll see the collection name is dynamic. So here's my collection. Okay, I'm going to call my DB. I have a collection keyword, and it's going to be based off my API URL, first element. You'll see whatever they pass in the API must equal the collection name. So I'm making them use this collection name. So if I scroll up, my collection name is dataset. So in this URL, if they don't pass dataset, then it's not going to work. Okay, if you want to make it more dynamic, you can. Now I'm going to grab the actual query. So we saw the query is going to be the next element. So I'm going to use a ternary operator. If the API URL third parameter or second parameter, the third element in the list, is true, so if it's there, if they have some value, then I'm going to say the name, that's going to be my key, is equal to API URL's second value. Otherwise, so this is a ternary operator, it's an empty value. So if there's actually a value, the key will be name and the value will be whatever they sent. Now this can be dynamic because you see here in my actual API URL, I actually have the key and I actually have the value. But in this case, I'm just going to grab the value. I'm going to say that the key should always be name. So we can just focus on the REST concepts here. But it'd be very easy to change this dynamically as well. You can just do another split on the equal symbol. And let's go ahead and print this out before we do anything with the database. Okay, I wanted to go over a lot of this before the exploration. Now remember, in MongoDB, _ID is going to be MongoDB's ID. So it's a special object ID. And you'll want to know about this ID. So here I'm going to upload the code again. If I want to close this node server out, I just do a Control-C, run it again, come back up, do a GET request. You'll see the request URL is this. After I do a split, the first element's empty, the second element's data set, the third element's the parameters. Okay, right now we're not getting an ID. Let's just print out the entire query. I'm going to save the code, upload it, terminate the server by doing Control-C, run the server again, send up the GET request, and now you'll see here my query in the GET is an object. If I want to print out that object and see the entire thing, I can get rid of this string here. Just do a console.dir on the query. Update the code on the server, run the server. Let's see if this will print it out. So you see I have name equal to this. Okay, so it's a long thing here. It's not the prettiest. We'll fix that up. So technically I can do query.name. So I go back to what it was, query and get. I can do query.name. And this should print out an actual value instead of the ID. Okay, run the server again, send up the GET request from the client. Server receives the request, and you'll see here's what I have in my value. Now let's put this into Mongo. So I've already connected to Mongo. I'm printing out the data. Based off the collection, I can do a find based off the query, and I'm going to do a toArray, and then I'm going to have a function call, which will have the error and all the items. Remember, I'm doing a GET request, so I want to grab the elements from MongoDB. So here's what it looks like all on one line, but I'm going to separate that on multiple lines. And here, let's see if we have an error. Okay, always check for the errors. If I have an error, I'm going to respond with our result and this error message. We had a query error. I'm actually going to pass the error. If I don't have an error, let me do a console log. So I'm going to say searching. Remember, we're doing a GET request. GET request is for retrieving data. So I'm searching for, I'm going to pass in JSON stringify the actual query. Okay, so let's see if this goes in and see if we can get this print. So again, update the code on the server. Come back, rerun the server. So do a Control C, run the server again, send up that GET request. Okay, you'll see it didn't find anything. There was no error. We're trying to find to see if name is equal to Nick. So we can actually open up MongoDB and put some data into it. So I can open up Mongo. I can do show DBs. There's the demo. So I'm going to use demo, DB data set, insert one, name equal to Nick. Okay, so it's there. Now let's try to do this same GET request. So if I do a find, okay, we have that value. So if I come back, do an exit, run my node script, come over here and do a GET, you see I'm searching for this, and we can send back the response. So I didn't get an error. This is what I'm searching for. So let's respond with the actual value itself. So you see the format's a little messed up. We're going to fix that here soon. But at least we're able to connect, search for something, and then make sure you always close the connection once you're done. Because with REST, I don't need to remember that connection. So every request I make is going to be stateless. So I grab the request, I pull out all the contents from it. If it's a GET request, make sure the collection name is equal to the collection name we specified. See if there's an error when connecting to Mongo. If not, set up the DB, grab the collection, set up the query, look for that. If I get an error when searching for it, print out the error. Otherwise, respond with the data that we got, which are going to be all the items in the array. So let's see what happens now. Now, what's cool about this is you can actually see it printed out on the local machine as well. So here's my client-server communication. So let me clear out this from before. Copy your address, do a refresh. Okay, clear out the console, put back in your address, do name equal to Nick, hit enter, do a send. Okay, so you'll see this is what came back. Name is equal to Nick. That was what came back from my GET request. So if I come back into the code, I pulled out all the pieces that I need. I did a GET request, I search for that, and then I send it back to the client. So here's my client-server communication. Let me pull up a little graph here. Okay, it's not the best graph, but it's the first one. Essentially, here's my browser running with the website. I click on GET, I type in all the data, it goes to the server. Server says, okay, first process the request by processing the URL, determining what method they want to use, then connect to MongoDB, search for that record. If you find the record, then pass the record back to the client, and the client is now showing it on the console. Okay, so I have client-server communication. Now remember HTTP and REST. So I'm using HTTP, I'm using a GET request. So I'm making a request to the server. Now the server will process that request and send back the response. So the request will have what method I'm using and what data I'm sending up as parameters. The server will then say, okay, status code 200, everything's okay, and then send back the corresponding data, or depending on what you're trying to do. Now we finished GET. We're going to look at the other methods in the next video. So stick with Professor Wergeles. We'll see you in the next video.